Before I begin, I just want to give you a bit of a background as to how I even got into this. I am both a deep practitioner and researcher, and frankly, I stumbled across the model in this location, which is in Barcelona. And I was with a group of about 20 American thinkers, researchers, practitioners that were also equally impressed in understanding that the world was changing and that they were seeing before their very eyes how innovation is changing and requiring new ways of collaborative innovation, working together to solve problems in really different ways. And it leads to sort of a spreading out effect, if you will, of a geography. So rather than just thinking about what's happening in one building, the need to draw on insights and learning from a range of actors starts to put this physical space and all the different buildings and all the different organizations in that geography more in the center of your gravity. That is sort of the underlying concept of why these innovation districts are and why they continue to emerge and evolve. And it's just because of the complexity of innovation, the complexity of technological sophisticated thinking that underpins it, and with the kinds of specializations that are now required, you really need to think about other organizations and players as being part of your partnership circle. And so that's the basis of this work. And so here's what I'm going to do today. I want to sort of explain to you about Norfolk, why I'm here, and what I've understood from my very, very short period of time. So we do have a global network of innovation districts. We build our work first in the empirical. We do a lot of research to understand what makes districts tick, thrive, and evolve. And then we support innovation districts that are on that road to discovery, to give them new insights and new intel, to ask questions for themselves and to support themselves and others in their journey. So this is like really high up. So I'm gonna have three parts of my talk, and the first part is the longest, because I think, frankly, it's real important to talk about what is this model, what does it look like, how does it feel? How is it varied in different places, so everyone is clear. I know that not everyone is actively in the nick and probably have some really legitimate questions about what it is. And then really want to talk about innovation imperatives, how there's sort of sets of new and not so new innovation imperatives that are actually strengthening the role of place-based innovation, including innovation districts. And then lastly, been here for 2 days, but I've been in this work for 17 years exclusively now. And I'm picking up some things that I want to share with you. It's incomplete, it's not fully baked, so that part is sort of the least well-developed. But I want to give you some of my reflections and insights, and you can easily push back. But I wanted to start with this, because I actually, if you look at the spatial geography globally of VC investment, which is an indicator of where the market is and like where people are willing to take risks, you see the spatial imbalance. It's very, very clear that there's just a few geographies on the planet where VCs are saying they're willing to take their bets. And it's not just the VCs, right? There's others that are in that space on industries that are seeing that story as well. And I am often called, and I fly to places that are actually often not in those circles. How do we drive and grow an innovation economy when the market isn't necessarily seeing that we're ready yet, right? And so different places have both government and private sector investment to try to shift the balance of this, right? And that's really what's happening in a lot of places right now. But I'm often called by cities and states, even national governments, local districts, local leaders, universities, medical institutions, companies like Google, and others to say, what would it take to create this unique innovation ecosystem surrounding us or adjacent to us? And it builds off of the work that I wrote in 2014 with Bruce Katz, The Rise of Innovation Districts. And this is how we defined what an innovation district is. And this is a very simple definition, which is really around where institutions and industries cluster and connect with other actors, startups, accelerators, incubators, scale-ups, other economic actors to create a much more deep elixir of innovation capacity, drawing on very different skill sets that otherwise would not have been achieved. And they're not happening generally in like anywhere. They're happening in more walkable, urban, dense areas where you can get that proximity effect, although we're seeing some other models sort of emerge from this variation since Bruce and I wrote this paper. Bottom line, you know, I think we see over the last 17 years, and most specifically in the last 6, an incredible way to start looking at districts through different lenses. And I want to give you a picture of that. So imagine that I'm giving you 6 pairs of glasses, okay? And each lens is a pair of glasses that I want you to look at districts in a different way. All right, lens 1, typology. Districts are located in different parts of the region, and it defines who they are, what their strengths and possibilities could be, and who would likely like to co-locate there. So Bruce and I put together this diagram where there were 3 typologies. Okay, now since that time, we've engaged with a number of innovation districts. In fact, we now know that there's around at least 150 evolving and emerging worldwide, and we are engaged with a 3rd. Now, that breadth and depth of the work, because it's not that we're just doing research, we're actually going to ground in a number of these places, helps us understand that actually, when we still look at the typologies, we do still see a dominant type that's happening in the midtowns and downtowns. There's no doubt. Okay, so when we looked at 23, and that does not include the NIC because it was sort of in an earlier group, we went ahead and we saw this, but I want to highlight a few things. So industrial areas are increasingly an area of focus. And then areas around government R&D facilities are, this one only shows 1, but we're seeing this as a growing phenomenon, and this actually has some real relevance for what's happening here. So there's other typologies that are starting to form. So that's one set of glasses. Another has to do with the same level of analysis that we undertook of 23 districts across 15 countries. What we did not understand is the extent to which innovation districts have global reach. We knew they had global reach, but we didn't understand the extent to which researchers engaged with other researchers across either 100, easily 180, 200 different cities and regions around the world. This level of information coming from other areas of the globe, pulling it back in to a hyper-local, think of the size of the NIC, think of a size even smaller than the NIC. You can even have districts up to just 14 acres, pulling it all back in, and then working within that local ecosystem. You're having this incredible sort of concentration of new insight and knowledge that's now getting distributed through a networked collaborative model. So this phenomenon, right, is what's allowing these places to continue to evolve from a research and knowledge intensive, and puts them on the front lines of changing some of the most complex challenges that we have. So this is why we've been so fascinated with this work. Lens 3. Lens 3, everyone remember Lens 3, okay? Because Lens 3 is actually something for you. We have come to understand, not all, in fact, not as many as you would think, but some regions really have a constellation of different innovation districts and types of hubs that actually, when you have a better understanding of what they are and how they differentiate and how they collaborate, you actually have an adding up strategy that is very, very, very difficult to understand and comprehend without the data. It is such a powerful way to build a collaborate to compete model. And we're seeing this in Sydney, we're seeing this in South Australia, we're seeing this in Cambridge, in the UK, that this sort of constellation of districts and other innovation hubs is their narrative for building a strong region. And so I want you to know that. So here's lens 4. I actually believe that some of our research should just go up on walls, because I think there's some beauty about how different highly specialized thinkers are working together in a very artistic, integrated way that these kinds of pictures start to illustrate. And what we see here is the different kinds of fields of science, and underneath those very specific disciplines that are working together to solve very complex problems. And so what we do as researchers is we look and conduct this kind of analysis because we're realizing it's the DNA of a district. What kinds of researchers, knowledge-intensive companies, other kinds of entrepreneurs are trying to solve very specific problems coming out of very unique areas of fields of science and disciplines. And then we look in the middle to see where are they converging to identify innovative insight, new novel discoveries that obviously aren't happening when they're separated and siloed. So the integration of these disciplines is where we consistently find new innovative thought. So we look for the convergence, and we can find that in place after place after place. So here is another way that we slice that. It's not just looking at the convergence, it's also what are the enabling technologies that are underpinning it. And in some ways, this can be a roadmap into a geography, whether it's an integrated AI, whether it's sensing, whether it's cyber. Where are these districts, like what are they leveraging to build and discover new insights around complex problems? And the technological piece of it is critical. Okay, there's no doubt about it. And so it often requires different actors and thinkers to be thinking about it. Lens 5 is the physical. These are place-based geographies. So literally, for every single district of these 23, we could have 65 different maps where I could show you a different story about what these places look like, feel like, how they integrate R&D, and how they integrate places for children, how they're creating retail, and at the same time, how they're having these R&D magnets. And what we're trying to understand is the extent to which these kinds of R&D facilities and R&D magnets that are driving both applied and translational research are actually being integrated with things that get people out of the buildings, where there's more amenities and fun, and pulling them out and creating this ultimate mashup. So we're looking at it as much of a sociological experiment as much as an innovative one. And we, on this quest, continue to learn every month. Every month there's a new insight by conducting new research. So we won't stop. We won't stop. And so what does it look like on the ground, right? On the ground, what you see, sort of snapshots, are things like this. New kinds of places where institutions and industries come together. This one's trying to solve a highly complex problem with composites. There we can find places that are much more open and porous, where people are invited to come in. Startups and scale-ups are supported in very different ways. They can stay, they can belong and feel like they're actually part of a growing set of community thinkers that are solving some of our world's most wicked problems. We see places that are transforming their green space and open space into network places, programming them, inviting people in to challenge them to think about things quite differently, and that includes children. And that means it's creating a very different and diversified offer. So if you just look at all of the lenses, and then you look at these photos, you understand there's a complexity here that is why you need the Donnas and the Lindas, and you need the board, and you need other actors to kind of come in as partners to this work. And this is what we are focused on. So our last lens is this: how are you organized? And this is where I have been fixated as a thinker and researcher for the last 2.5 years, because what I've realized is that these start organically, but they don't remain organic in the sense that they ultimately need some kind of governance structure to create more intentional strategies, to create more intentional moves that drive and help this place evolve. It's this intentionality that requires a new kind of leadership, and it means, right, that core champions often have to help finance the early stages of this governance model. So it has, a team, it can be thinking about programming, it can start raising its own money, going out for additional fundraising, doing different kinds of programs for children as much as for innovators, and thinking about what kinds of technology should we be focusing on, how do we do industry attraction in an authentic way. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. It means about how are you organized to do that. And so I've been studying and studying and studying that piece. So this is now about organizational development. So before it was a sociological experiment, a placemaking exercise, an understanding of innovation economy and how it's changing, but it's looking at it through all these lenses. And what we generally find is that we have a framework over these years, and we see that districts have these kinds of ambitions. All right, they want to be a place of critical mass of strong thinkers, young talent coming in, new talent being grown, children coming in, families coming in, different kinds of amenities. They want to create a place that has this own sort of energy field. People are drawn to it. You know when you have it, you know when you don't have it. Critical mass. But then there's other ambitions around equity and inclusion, and there's others around sustainability and decarbonization that as we work with dozens of districts, we continue to find ourselves sort of with this set of ambitions that they generally share across. But to get there, they need to be intentional. And this gets us back to the organizing for success. What are your R&D specializations? What are they? I mean, what are you specialized in? What hat can you hang on and say, here are the 3 things or 5 things that really differentiate us from other parts of the region or the country? What's particularly convergent? What's in the center of that? Is that something around genomics, or is that something actually on computer science? Like, what is tying you together with these different actors? A buzzing connected community, which is around how you're pulling people in, and then the quality of place. These kinds of strategies and integrated moves are what makes these kinds of districts evolve over time. So what's the order of this? How do you sequence it? How do you finance it? These are the questions that this board has been asking itself, right? And others all over the world. And then the purple is this organizing piece. If you're not organized, you don't have someone working and focusing on it, it's going to be very, very difficult. Okay, so this is sort of the lenses of districts, how it looks, how it feels, how intentional it is. And now it's really focusing on what are the innovation imperatives that are making these places even more relevant. Even more relevant. Okay, so here's what we found. And it actually aligns with some of I looked at the national funding or federal funding from the United States to understand where a lot of the federal funding in terms of specific competitive grants, a significant amount is going in human health. We know we have DoD funding, particularly in this area, but when we look at competitive grants, there's a significant amount that's going in toward human health, medicine and human health. And in fact, in our analysis, 70% of the districts have been saying, this is our focus, this is what we're seeing that we really are strong on. Well, actually, we're finding it's true and not so true, because they're actually having a diversified offer where they can be doing more work on decarbonization and on de-risking, such as energy security, than they realize. They're just not actually elevating these kinds of R&D capacities. They're putting it more in this area. Well, we have a lot of problems to take on, and I know we have a lot of human health problems, but we also have planet problems. We have security problems. We have energy problems. So how do many of these pivot and shift and align themselves to the changing imperatives? And so this is where Bruce Katz and I, it has been 10 years since we've written another piece, and we just wrote this other piece which really talks about these three imperatives. So the diversification of talent, which is one strategy, but really around equity and inclusion and using these places as drivers for that type of growth. The decarbonize, which is very hard to see here, but how can you become much more a center of decarbonization, a center of resilience? How can you be a test bed? And then lastly, you can barely see that, de-risk, which is given the geopolitical climate, given the extent to which the production has been offshored historically, how are things being reshored, how are particular areas such as Mexico now being part of nearshoring, how are other places thinking about their own energy security, and they're using this as their new pulpit for thinking about new materials, new energies, new types of fuels. So it's changing the production, it's changing where the production is occurring, and it's changing what kinds of technologies and materials they're developing under this rubric. So we see that, and just three examples of districts that have pivoted in response to that. So Donna, you mentioned Cortex. Cortex has been known as for its life sciences and technology. It's shifted radically into the diversification of talent, specifically understanding that there was a growing cybersecurity cluster, 7,000 jobs remain vacant, and yet the underemployment in the region was staggering, and so they shifted their time and resources to work with top cyber companies to say, help us devise a new talent growth strategy. So this district has now put that in the center of their desk. They didn't have that even 3 years ago. They're pivoting. Okay, so they're doing their other things, but now they're adding that. The Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District, which is in Sheffield, they have a no room for error type of production facility that are working with Boeing and McLaren, working on new materials and composites, but they're also working on energy and new energy sources to be supporting that country's desire to become more and more energy independent. And so that's their push. And they were just here yesterday, and this is one of the things they talked about. And then Tonsley, which is in South Australia, and I believe some of you are going to go see Tonsley that are in this room, is a very interesting story because this is an old automotive plant that actually reused itself and is now one of the first green hydrogen facility plants and distributive plants that is now often combined with natural gas to fuel homes, and using solar that they're now creating 60% of their own energy, and it's going to move up to 100%. So these are examples of places that are pivoting in response to these innovation imperatives. And I just want to go and say, if there was some places, right, for you to see and to learn and to understand on the diversification of talent, I wanted to give you this list, right? Because people are like, I'm going to go everywhere. No, let me give you a shorter list of places that are highly focused on this, and then even more, here are the ones that I think are really worth looking at, right, given limited time. Really worth looking at and thinking through how they're trying to diversify their talent. Now I want to take Cleveland, and we had heard a little bit about Cleveland before, but Cleveland is an interesting story because we defined innovation districts led by anchor institutions such as medical institutions and universities. Well, this story actually is the one of a new kind of anchor, which is the community foundation that said, if we actually want to drive an economy that is more shared and prosperous, we need to physically co-locate in the district and drive a new agenda. And so they actually identified an area of land that was acquired over time, and they put their headquarters right there in the middle. And this is their new headquarters. They just received a new award for this building. And through that facility, they are now working with the regional ecosystem on new equitable growth strategies and programs that are tying to R&D. So you have, just like if there was a map right here, you have some of the strongest medical institutions in the country. They're just like right here. Yet, the community health problems in this particular area are staggeringly high. The problems are pervasive. And so the disconnect between what is going on has led this community foundation to say, let's create a new center of gravity around community health. So they have a new birthing facility, they have a new R&D, community-based R&D, and they actually also helped pull in a magnet, so focusing on advanced manufacturing, new materials, in ways that can actually be supportive of the growing industry base that is around it. So this example of a new kind of anchor fundamentally changing the entire story and narrative of this innovation district lets us know how important even one actor that really leans in. This is what leaning in looks like. I mean, this is really leaning in. They're changing entirely, not just what's happening there, they're actually redefining what the model of an innovation district is, thankfully. I presented to their board and I cried that day because I saw what they were doing and I said, oh my God, you are reconceiving what this is, and I want to thank you for that. So, decarbonization. So we actually, with those same 23, we were tracking to see, are you feeling the effects of climate? Yes, 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 yep. They're all feeling the effects of climate in one way or another. Then the question is, well, what are you doing about it? Because, you know, you're so innovative, right? And you're doing these things that we've been studying and analyzing. What if we look at it through a decarbonization lens? And so we looked, and we talked, and we had a lot of interviews, and I have to say, they're not doing enough. It was surprising, frankly, to share that I think they are still in pilot project mode, and I think that those districts that take the decarbonization and resiliency strategy as part of their core ambition, I think they're going to accelerate ahead. And there's some that are doing some very interesting things. I just believe there's more that can be done. The de-risking, I bring in something that Bruce Katz presented yesterday at an event where he was talking about the first stage of a playbook for this region and how the high level of DoD funding, which is, for example, in 2023, $8.3 billion US from DoD coming into this region and creating an entirely new set of players, including the need for a stronger and connected supply chain, is really a really interesting story for your region because it's actually building on this. And that includes, right, energy security as much as anything else. So the fact is, this story for us has sort of become an interesting de-risking strategy. So that takes me then to the NIC, and that takes me also to all of you, even if you're not in the NIC. And why is that? Okay, do you remember this image? It was lens 3. Now, lens 3 is also your story. It became very apparent to me in a very short period of time that you have very distinct geographies within your region that could be spatialized and have a clarity in the distinctiveness in their R&D capacities and their very specific disciplines, that you could understand different kinds of investment, different kinds of industry, where the collaboration is happening most heavily, where there's gaps, where we could work on. And that kind of story, which would include the NIC, it could include Newport News, it could include a whole series of areas around like the maritime industry, but understanding the level of collaboration and actually, if we identify the gaps and fill them in the right places, how it helps you all rise. There really aren't that many places that we have seen that would truly benefit from this. Cambridge, the UK is one, I've said this before. Sydney, South Australia, you're definitely one of those where you actually spatialize the R&D activity, the level of collaboration, and the industry specialization as a way of really understanding the differentiation and the complementaries. We did this in Amsterdam. This is the map of Amsterdam. It helped change the discourse on how the different hubs were engaging with each other and how different actors were supporting each other. So this, to me, says this constellation story, the mental map for your region, would be a really interesting exercise to undertake. It also said to me, in talking, I've only, again, 1.5 days of conversation, but where districts are and where the NIC wants to go are aligned, and also aligned with the innovation imperatives. So in talking with leaders today and yesterday, the desire, the need, the imperative to diversify talent is critical. And NIC wants to play a role in that, a complementary role to what others are doing in the region. It's spot on. If the issue around decarbonization, creating a resilient strategy, given the fact that you're basically at ground zero for climate, what does that mean? How do you actually take that imperative and harness this as an opportunity? So we take those. And then the question for the NIC is, if we are seeing this level of DoD investment, what does that mean for the NIC? I think this is a question that needs to be discussed and debated, but not alone, with others in the region, because the regional story and how you connect is so important that I'm just honestly, I want to go, that lens 3 for me speaks so much about what I see and what you could be doing. And it includes, though, understanding the enabling technologies. So conversations today really help cement that a much better understanding of what kinds of organizations and companies and even your anchor institutions in the NIC that are building on new and advanced technologies, that's the pathway, right? And then that'll help us understand where there may be new industries that are wanting to come in to benefit from very similar or complementary technologies. And we're seeing this in Basel, we're seeing this in Melbourne, we're seeing this in Cambridge, we're seeing it over and over, we're seeing it in St. Louis, enabling technologies, the better and the more specified we are in how differentiated they are, and if they are clustering, there's a much better and interesting way of playing with how industries start to play a much stronger role in particular areas that seem to be right now very industry or institution focused. Okay, this came out from a series of conversations today. We know that you're ground zero for climate. The flooding that you have demonstrates what many other cities are going to experience, and it is leading, right, to the development of this wall. So the question is it possible for this transformation of this flood wall to actually be done in a way that actually is designed to become a living lab for clean tech, climate tech, other kinds of resilient programs and learning strategies. So it's instead of just a wall, it actually becomes an area of learning. That is not a small proposition given where the stage is of this work, but it's an interesting one. And so for those of you that are thinking about how are we harnessing our climate conditions, several of you identified this today as an area of, wow, we could be a global model if we could work with the Army Corps of Engineers in a slightly different way, but that we're taking this as an opportunity to become a learning lab. I think this is something to hold on to, and I want to just highlight it. It came up several times today. And then lastly, second to last, data. This is why we take and invest our own money in R&D on understanding innovation districts, because they are so distinct. If you don't have the data that's understanding why this district is strong and producing and attracting these kinds of industries with a level of specificity that clarifies why it's different from this one, it's pretty difficult to argue what your value proposition is and why industry should come there. It's pretty difficult to say you can take on very specific wicked problems without the data. I believe the NIC needs more data. Okay, and so this morning we sort of talked through what kinds of data could you be gathering to really be more informed about your unique value proposition. So here's my last slide. All right. If I was here for a week, the names would probably change because I would keep talking and keep talking and keep talking. So understand this is a partial list. But this is my concluding slide. And it starts actually where I began, that this is a story about collaborative innovation and collaborative problem solving. For the NIC to move to the next level, to be a partner to other parts of the region in that constellation, to really have and fire at all pistons, it really is going to take actors to lean in. Okay, and so at the regional leadership level, there is going to be clarity. We need regional leaders that are looking across to help identify clear gaps where the NIC could really support and advance this region. Okay, there's a lot of you in this room that have unique insights that could help the NIC identify some promising areas that would advance the region. Local philanthropy. Okay, just about every innovation district that is functioning does draw on philanthropy. In fact, there are multiple funding streams, and community foundations are a phenomenal source of early funding to get districts like the NIC moving. And I think there's a role here for local philanthropy. Now, anchor institutions. Conversations today, several conversations with anchors. What became clear is there's a couple of strategies. But what was underpinning that were, again, the enabling technologies that they said, you know what? Yeah, there is an enabling technology play that we actually could help support and facilitate, and I think that conversation needs to go much further. And so that's deeper conversations with the anchors on that, and using that as an authentic way to draw industries in aligned areas. And those are those kinds of technologically advanced companies that value the walkable environment that you have a lot in big parts of the NIC. So when I go and I look at innovation districts, what I generally find when we spread out where the industry is, we find that a lot of the technologically advanced companies are in a lot of the walkable areas because they want to have also the benefits of the amenities and the other kinds of things. And so understanding what they are and where they want to be, this is exactly what needs to happen. But it builds actually from the technologies, and it builds from understanding the gaps and filling those gaps. The diversification of talent, the NIC wants to do this. They want to do this in a way that's supportive of what's happening in the region. So again, real deep conversations about, rather than duplicating, how does the NIC provide very unique talent growth strategies? It's part of a constellation story. It's a part of a new mental map. And then lastly, how can this flood wall become a learning lab and a living lab for the different kinds of climate tech, different kinds of resilience strategies and solutions? How could it be actually even an opportunity, as one mentioned, for reshaping what placemaking could look like rather than just a wall? That is not an easy move, but I want to put it up here. This is just the start. If I could be here longer, I'd go around probably to this part of the room. But you have a very, very strong base regionally with significant money coming in, a significant strong base of regional actors. The question now is for the NIC, what is the tightening of the value proposition to support this broader regional strategy and to support these innovation imperatives that are only growing in magnitude day after day? I want to thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. All right. Few Q&A.
I think just a few minutes,
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind.
I'd have to.
Just a few, maybe down to
Yeah.
5. Now remember, any question you have here will take us away from the questions in front of the bar. So just be very judicious about what your question, but just maybe a few questions.
Yes. Hey, they're in the back.
Hi. Sorry. My name is Michael Harvey. I'm a brand new GNC member and very excited about the NIC. A question and a comment. One is that there was an article in the paper maybe a month ago about trying to really co-locate a lot of the wind energy stuff here, because it's hard to be Silicon Valley or Manhattan or LA or things like that, but we really could be that for a lot of the clean tech stuff. So that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Question is, what is the impact of remote work on all of this?
So here's the thing, I travel globally, and the remote work phenomenon is really different from place to place. What I have learned with innovation districts are a couple of things. One, that in times of increased remote work, COVID, recessions, where things are depressed, changing demographic forces, the true innovators of innovation districts are actually the board, people that are working day to day to say, how do we draw people back in? And there are incredibly innovative ways that this has been happening. And so what we found, and we tracked this, is we saw 3 things happening during COVID and even right after the pandemic. Investment actually went up in innovation districts across the board. It wasn't just in infectious diseases. There was a really focused investment more on R&D. People started to wake up to see the value of that. 2, the innovation infrastructure that was located in these places meant that researchers and workers actually needed to come in, not all, but needed to come in to use these facilities. I'm not sure how many wet labs people are building in their living room, but I can assure you that it makes these places much more sticky and resilient, and we track that. So what we found is they had significant amount of reduction given COVID, and then even the swing back now has been much more significant if there's a strong innovation infrastructure component and a clarity on these really specific disciplines. If it's pretty loose and you don't really know and it actually feels very service oriented, then those particular districts generally are having a harder time. So this is why the tightening of the value proposition actually has another value. Yeah, I think actually I'll stop there. Yeah. Yep.
I can project. So one of our challenges as a region was
Yep.
showed on one of your slides for DoD spending. It had, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and Hampton, and then the other cities that make up our 7 cities. anywhere else in the United States, that would be one county, and there may be a city inside of that county or two. So
Right.
given that, I guess, how fractured this region is and the challenges that poses to creating innovation districts, to growth, are there any other cities or metros that you've seen that have faced similar challenges? And if there's any insights that you might give or just recommendations for us as a region, where of course many of us, myself included, see Norfolk as the core, what can we do to overcome those challenges from being this fractured area?
So this has actually come up a lot in a lot of the conversations that I've had today, and I'm not saying data is the answer, I'm not. But what I have found in other places globally is that when we conduct this kind of analysis that is actually focusing less on jurisdiction but on capabilities and critical mass and a concentration effect, the dialogue starts to change. And to say, okay, let's look at us as a collective, and that we need to collaborate to compete to move to the very next level. That's the change of discourse that's happened in the places that have these kinds of analyses. There's clearly other things that need to get done, right, in terms of how you organize. But I do know that there are many different, regional organizations that are trying to stitch together some of these components. There are many other places outside of the United States that do not have that kind of active leadership on the part of the industry, on the part of the private sector thinking about the future of these places. So the fact that you have regional alliances and other entities that are trying to think with this, it's enviable, okay, even in the midst of what feels very fragmented. A very unique story, which is a US story, really. I can't find that in the UK, not to this extent. The kind of leadership that goes and spans across, and that spans across on the industry side, I cannot find it. There's nowhere else on the planet that has it to this extent. And so I think you have the capability to counter this. I think if it's data, I think it's figuring out where you're going to make the right investments, where you have a shared agenda, where you let others lead. And having that kind of clarity can begin with a mental map, but it really also begins with that kind of acknowledgement that even though we're dispersed, we actually do have a collaborate to compete agenda. What is it? And build on that. Yeah.
If y'all can hear me, I'll grab the mic if I need it. Doug Smith with the Hampton Roads Alliance. Some of y'all have heard my shtick as recently as yesterday, but I'll tell you, this is our regional moment right now. You really need to grasp that. The regional economy, the regional economic order is changing. And there are certain communities, and I'm really listening to Julie and Bruce espouse this, but there is an unprecedented amount of federal money and now private money flowing toward this issue to remilitarize, reindustrialize, and decarbonize all at once with very little guidance. It is the regions that do the things that you all are doing and get their act together and figure out how to capitalize on that are going to succeed. The things that we do here, have done here for the last 30 years, candidly have been undervalued, right? We do things that no one else in the world can do. A big part of that is nuclear aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. And we are in I loved your word on your blog last week, we're in a belligerent world, right? It is a dangerous place. There are only certain places that are allowed us to keep this world safe, and Hampton Roads is one of them. So when she talks about regional playbook, that's us, that's the alliance. We are doing this in collaboration with the Roundtable, with the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, with the chambers, using Bruce, now using Julie, to create this regional investment playbook that analyzes all of the federal spending. We're getting money in here that nobody else is getting. And I'm one of the people that ran around here saying we need to diversify away from the military, right? It made some sense in hindsight because we weren't getting the kind of budgets that we were getting in those days. It makes no sense today. But we can diversify within the military and do innovative and creative things. And I think the niche plays a really important piece in that. And I would just offer to you, we will help you in any way we can. We'd love you to pull in. We've tried to pull Linda in to much of what we've been doing. And
great.
It's an exciting time to be here, and I appreciate what y'all are doing. We want to work with you.
So, wow, right? I mean, I just, look, I travel all over, and I don't hear this very often, okay? And so you need to hold on to your strength and your visionary leaders, because in many places it's just not at this level. Okay, it's just not. It's palpable here because you do have a moment, and it's just exciting to be here, really. And I think that the NIC, I want to just pull that back in. I think the NIC, right, is what is their role to support this in a way that is both complementary and synergistic. And so the gaps that you're seeing regionally can in part be filled by what can be done at the NIC. And I think this is a really important message, and it means that those with insight and ideas really need to come and lean in and help shape that agenda. I really do. Yeah.
So, Julie, just on behalf
Yeah.
of the Greater Norfolk Corporation and the NIC, thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate it. I will say,